Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry I can't speak any Welsh, otherwise I would obviously introduce myself in Welsh. But I've been asked to tell you my story, and when people ask, what do you do? If I say I'm an entrepreneur, first thought, obviously, can't get a job. But I actually say, so what do you mean? And the words of a 60s song come into my head. I started out with nothing, and I still have most of it left. But seriously, when I started my first business, starting a business was a career choice. It wasn't a way of making a quick buck. And it takes a long time. In my view, on average, it takes about 8 years for a business to become bankable. So I'm hoping that Buddy's going to become bankable quite soon. I want to dispel the myth tonight that you need to have a big idea to start a business. I'm going to talk to you about some companies that you might know that didn't. And I want to talk to you about failure and embracing it. It's a good thing. It's not something to be afraid of. If anyone wants to leave now, feel free. So 3 businesses that I'm going to talk about that are my businesses to start with. I started my first business basically because I was lazy. So I left university, I went to an American management consultancy that told me they were in Chicago. They were actually in Evanston, Illinois. And they were working with major pharmaceutical companies to optimize sales forces. And so I joined that company thinking, well, if I went into management consulting, I was going to learn how to run a business, and that was going to be really useful for me, not realizing that when you go into management consulting straight out of university, you get really good at spreadsheets. So after a while of getting really good at spreadsheets, I went to my boss and I said, look, I could write some software that would mean that I could do what it takes me 3 months to do, I could do it overnight. So how about I do that? In fact, I was sort of working on it anyway. He said, don't be ridiculous. I mean, we charge for you for those 3 months. And I kind of went, you still can? Anyway, so we didn't have quite the same view. So I wrote the software anyway, and I started my first business. And it's a long story. I ended up with 16 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies as clients. And the main reason for that is because within a year of leaving that company and starting my own, they decided to sue me and say, obviously, I must have stolen their software, etc. So that taught me to stay away from legal conflict. Something I've tried to do in my personal life as well. But when I started out with that, I literally got on the phone, cold called the chairman of Smithcombe Beecham International and said, got to come and see you because I can run your Salesforce strategy better than you can. He was obviously intrigued at the arrogance of it. Sat me in his office and I told him this story. And he said, how old are you? Odd question, I thought. How do I answer that one? I was, 21 and a half or something. So I said, you don't ask a lady her age, thinking I might have got away with it. And he sort of looked blank. So I said, well, how old do you think I am? He said, I guess you must be about 30. I said, yeah, that's about right. That's the last time I lied about my age that way. So anyway, so I was working with all these pharmaceutical companies, and I ended up working with Procter & Gamble in their healthcare division. And they said, this is all really interesting stuff, but actually our real spend is in the fast-moving consumer goods side. Now, if you could optimize our spend over there, that would be the holy grail. So I started thinking about it. And they basically developed a model that allowed them to do that. So they could work as a management team, put a load of numbers into a box, press optimize, and it actually worked. The first time I showed it, obviously it didn't really work behind the scenes. But it actually worked, and they started using it. And that's now used by most of the major brand owners across the world. And I sold that business to Publicis Group. But while I was doing that, one of my clients was Norwich Union. This was the late 90s. Is that me? This is the late 90s. And so I went to Norwich Union board and I said, okay, in the online business, in the general insurance business, you need to reduce costs. It's a commoditizing market. If you can be cheaper than your competition, you're going to get the share. How do you do that? Well, you need to get online. So this was like 1997, 98. And I said, you need to spend £6 million over the next year creating norwichuniondirect.co.uk, and you'll get a return from that in about 9 years. Obviously, they weren't that impressed by that, but I had a better idea. So I said, okay, instead of spending the £6 million on your own, get 5 other insurance companies, spend £1 million each, create a market, and it's a benefit for consumers. Seemed like a no-brainer to me. Anyway, they said, what, work with our competition? Don't be ridiculous. So I started it as a little project, and that's now Confused.com. So basically with that business, and I had quite an unusual business in those days, so internet funding bubble, I had a business that actually generated revenue, because what I did was I knew all the cost per leads for the insurance companies. I sold them qualified leads. I didn't sell them based on a cost per sale, because no one was really buying on the internet in the early days. So basically a consumer came to my site, instead of making 10 phone calls and spending 10 minutes on each one, come to the site, fill in the details once and get 10 answers. Each of the insurers who quoted paid £6 for home, £3 for car, £1 for pet, £1 for travel. Easy. So if I got 6 insurers who quoted for home insurance, I got 36 quid whether anyone bought it or not. So that seemed to work, and was getting the insurers on, came down to Cardiff to see Admiral, and Admiral said, that's all very well, but we don't want consumers going through other people's sites, we want them to come straight to us. So I said, yes, but you're going to miss out on all the business if you don't. So they said, well, we'll do it if we're allowed to take a share in the business. And I said, well, then it wouldn't be independent for consumers, would it? So they made an offer for the whole company, and in fact, bought it. So a few years after that, I was, the PR story is actually true. The PR story is I was in Sainsbury's in Kent and turned around and lost my daughter. She wasn't there in that panicky moment, and that's where the PR story ends. But the truth is that I was actually at the checkout, did what many parents do, turned around, my daughter wasn't there. She was very small at the time. That panicky moment, I sort of looked at the girl and said, my daughter's gone, as though she was going to fix it. But weirdly, there was a security guard who was literally just standing behind. And he stepped forward and he said, no, don't panic. We'll sweep the shop. You go and stand at the exit of the car park and look in the back of the cars as they leave. So obviously, I totally ignored him, ran screaming around the shop, and luckily I found her in a few minutes. But it got me thinking, so with modern technology, why can't I give her something that I just know where she is? So it's not a phone. Oh, there's a mountain with some snow on it. It's just something that I can just give it to her, and I know. And that's how Buddy was born. So I thought, I'll make this thing. How hard can it be? Obviously, if I'd known then what I know now, I would not have dreamt of it. But that's the great thing about being an entrepreneur. You set off on this journey, convinced you can do it, and off you go. So I'm going to show you a couple of short videos to show you where Buddy has got to from finding children, which really will demonstrate how the journey really has evolved. Whenever I get a chance to show the TV ad, obviously I'm going to do that.
Darling, I'm fine. Okay, bye now.
Is that your daughter?
Yes, she means well, but ever since I had that fall, she does nothing but ring and check up on me.
You need a buddy.
A buddy?
Oh, good. All's fine with Mum.
How do you know?
I bought her a buddy.
A what?
This is amazing. It protects me day and night, and it stops Lucy from worrying about me.
If Mum has a fall or doesn't get home safe, Buddy tells me straight away exactly where she is.
Well done, Lucy. You always were the clever sister.
Oh. I think it's time I got a buddy.
We all have people we worry about. Find out how Buddy could help give peace of mind for you and for those you love. Visit buddy.co.uk.
You might notice the little black box not very attractive. Here's a preview of what's coming out later in the year. Slightly more attractive. This is because we keep changing, keep evolving. So Buddy's followed a classic entrepreneurial journey. When I first came up with a business plan, I presented to some investors, said it'd be great if you would invest in my business. And one of those was Anthony Bolton, who's probably Europe's most famous investor. And I had this plan that I was going to make these things and I was going to give them away to people, just like mobile phones, and have a leasing model. He said, don't be ridiculous. You don't start a business giving stuff away. So I rather disappointingly went home and rewrote the business plan and phoned him up a few days later and said, okay, I've revised my business plan. He very kindly took my call and went to see him again and presented a plan where it's exactly the same plan, but this time I charged for it up front and then had a leasing model as well. And he invested. And I said to him, so why did you invest this time when you wouldn't a week ago? And he said, because you listened to my point and you changed your plan. So interesting for take on what investors suggest to you. So many people have said to me, I'd like to start my own business, but I haven't ever thought of the right idea. So I'm going to take you through a couple of companies that started, I've just remembered I've missed a bit, which I'm going to come back to. I'm going to take you through in a minute some companies that started with that idea. But first of all, I just want to show you where we're at now with Buddy. So yesterday we uploaded a bid for the Ministry of Justice for £530 million. And this has come out of the back of this. So we got approached by a NHS trust who said we've got an issue with mental health patients who should be in prison, but they're in hospital. So as you can see from this video, this is a patient who's at a hospital in South London who's not allowed to leave the hospital. He's on ground leave. So he manages to get out of the hospital and gets on a bus. Luckily, he has our tracker on him. So off he goes into Covent Garden. And this reports into our monitoring centre, who recognise he's not supposed to be, then lock him up. So at that point, his device vibrates, and he thinks, oh no, I forgot I had that on. So he spends 15 minutes trying to take it off, but luckily can't. So off he goes, wandering down Oxford Street. Somewhere along here, he acquired £60. We're not sure how, but he left the hospital with no money and came back with £60. So he gets on a bus, and he's got no idea where this bus is going, but rather helpfully, actually, it was going sort of in the right direction to get back to the hospital. But by this point, all his details, his photo, his latest photo, his wrist profile, everything has been handed electronically to the police into their squad car, and they follow the bus and pull him off at this point, and have a discussion with him, where during that discussion they offer him a lift back to the hospital, and he accepts it and he returns to the hospital. Now, before we did this, they had a particular case, Terence O'Keefe, which was a national media alert, where one of their patients, who had 5 escorting nurses and security people with him when he went to community hospital, he wandered off, and he was missing for 30 days, and Bromley police estimated it cost £300,000 in the first day alone looking for him, with police, helicopters, murder squad, etc. The 30 days he was out, he murdered somebody and is now serving life in prison. So this is a really significant issue. And now this hospital has 100 of our trackers. Every patient, when they go out, has a tracker put on. And the average return time in an abscond, because we still get the odd one, is now 34 minutes. So that's where Buddy is, which is quite different from where it started. And I'll just come back to where I'd got to before. Which is about the other businesses that started a bit like me. You've got one idea and maybe it doesn't quite work out, so you develop it into something else. So some startups that you might know. So I don't know how many of you have heard of Alice in Cartoonland, but Alice in Cartoonland was Disney's most famous, no, not quite, it was his first cartoon series. Didn't quite work, so it failed completely, in fact, and in 1923 Disney went bankrupt. So he decided, oh, this doesn't work, I'm not very good at making cartoons. So he went off to Hollywood to get a job as a live-action film director. Luckily for us, he wasn't very good at that either, and he couldn't get a job, so he convinced his brother to start a business, and the two of them started Walt Disney Brothers Studios, and off they went. He then got a distributor for an Alice series, and we know the rest of the story. You know, Mickey Mouse in Steamboat Willie was the first ever sound cartoon, and that made him famous. We can learn a lot from Disney, and particularly the phrase that a lot of people like to quote, which is, if you can dream it, you can do it. So the next guy, Sam Walton, he started a business basically because he wanted to work for himself. He didn't have any other reason. But he'd never had a business before, so he thought, well, I'll rent a shop and I'll start selling things and see how it goes. So he rented a shop in his small town in America. And he'd never rented a shop before, so he didn't even know how to negotiate the lease. So he negotiated that he'd pay 5% of sales as his rent. Now, that was exorbitantly high, but he had no idea. So he set up this shop, and he started just selling the same stuff that was in the other shops. And he was obsessed with the shop across the road. He kept going across the road, having a look at this shop, seeing the stuff, and thinking, yeah, I've got to have the same stuff. And so anything they got, he got. And then he thought, I've got to have it cheaper. So he went to his suppliers, and he said, I want cheaper stuff. And some of them said yes. And some of them said no, and he changed them. But those who said yes, any shopkeeper in those days normally would have just taken extra profit. He didn't. He passed those savings on to his customers, and the rest is history. So he grew sales from $72,000 to $250,000 in about 3 years. But of course, he'd never signed a lease before with anyone and hadn't known how to do it. So he'd forgot to put a renewal clause in it. And the guy who owned the shop was very pleased that the shop was doing very well and took the shop back from him. So that was it. He'd lost everything. So he went off to another town and he did exactly the same thing and grew Walmart. And interestingly, he went back to that same old town and opened Walmart 18. And he wiped out all of the small shops around. And a journalist came in and had a chat with him and said, so, did you do that? Was that revenge? Was that because of what happened to you? And he said, no. My customers voted with their feet. So the next one, Mars. So Mars had a case of polio when he was a child, and his mother thought he's going to get bored, you know how bored boys get. So she taught him how to hand dip candy. And by 19, he was selling that candy. He became a wholesale candy seller. And he built that business. He became a large employer. He was doing very, very well. But he overtraded, and he basically failed. So he had to close down the factory, went back home, rather depressed. But decided, I'm going to start again. I'm going to start with my own chocolate bar. So he invented the Maro bar. And he grew the Maro bar business to about $100,000 a year, which is a lot of money in those days. But he had an issue that he couldn't grow it anymore because he was distributing this chocolate, and he put it in the lorries and off it goes to the shops, and there was a certain distance that he could go before the chocolate would start to melt. So he couldn't transport any further than that. So most people would have said, well, that's it, that's as far as my business is going to go, and kept doing that. But no, he spent 3 years researching a chocolate bar that didn't melt. That was the Milky Way. That became America's fastest growing chocolate bar, sold as chocolate malted in a candy bar. Now, sales of Milky Way grew to $793,000 before Mars hired his first salesperson. I don't know if any of you remember Boo.com in the late 90s, but Boo.com raised $180 million and invested in more than 400 staff before it had a single dollar of income. I think there's some learning there. So Mars gave his son $50,000 in 1932 and said, off you go, and start your own business. And he went off and set up Mars Limited in Slough, and he brought in the Mars Bar, and the Mars Bar was the American Milky Way, and he called it the Mars Bar. So 1945, a young inventor decides to start his own business in the ruins of a defeated Tokyo. So he's got $1,600 and 6 of his mates, and they sit in this little room and they think about, what business can we be? What can we do? And a guy called Akio Morita, he joined the company shortly afterwards, and he said in his diary, the small group sat in conference in the depressing surroundings of a burned-out department store, and for weeks they tried to figure out what kind of business the new company could enter. Ibuka's company is known to us all today. They started out as a radio repair shop. Sony's first product was a rice cooker. It didn't work, total failure. So next they invented a tape recorder. Nobody wanted it, nobody bought it. They kept going by sewing bits of copper wire onto cloths and selling them as heating pads. And that just was enough to give them enough to keep going until they had some great ideas. You'll be pleased to hear there's only one more. So 2 guys that you'll know, Bill Hewlett, Dave Packard, they started a business, no idea at all. They just thought it'd be fun to work together. So the 2 of them went off, started a business, and they said, if you look in their company records, they said, we didn't have any plans when we started, we were just optimistic. So they sold various electrical products, none of them worked, weren't doing very well at all, and then they sold a set of audio oscillators to a young animator called Walt Disney, and he used them for Fantasia, and the rest is history. So obviously, not all businesses start with no idea. I mean, General Electric was founded on the basis of a light bulb, but most people don't have an idea like that. So my point is to just get going. For me, I believe luck favours the persistent. That's the fundamental premise of successful business. You have to be prepared to kill an idea and to keep the company going. If the ultimate product is the company, then if the idea fails, you'll continue to go. And if the idea is successful, you'll continue to grow. So you'll notice all of the companies that I've given you, they all failed, but they all kept going. An organisation has the ability to evolve beyond the product life cycle. Think of those great example companies. None of them are now companies based on their first product. So if you're going to be an entrepreneur, and I know quite a lot of you are, you have to be prepared to grow that business and to give it the time it takes. And it takes a long time. And I know you have to do a 3-year business plan that shows you're going to make P&L in the year 3. You have to do that for investors. Then you have to ignore that and accept that your business is going to take 8 years to become bankable. If you equate the success of the business with the success of the idea, if the idea fails, you'll give up. Lots of entrepreneurs do. That's the wrong thing to do. Mustn't stick to that idea for too long, otherwise we'd still have the Maro bar. All products eventually become obsolete. So building a business takes a long time. One thing about us entrepreneurs, we are irrationally optimistic. 90% of businesses fail, but mine's not going to. That's the right thing to believe. Entrepreneurs also sweat the detail. It's a 24/7 job. Even CEOs of very big companies don't have to do that. And they earn a lot more money. But making your own decisions and being responsible for them, being responsible for your own success and failure is incredibly rewarding. You don't need the idea, you need persistence, stamina, determination. So I've told you you'll almost certainly fail. I've told you it's not a way to make a quick buck. Why on earth would you do it? I think if you have it in you, it's your destiny. I think if you can't stand sitting around waiting for your next promotion, You don't want to work for anyone else. If you don't want to be bored ever, you have to run your own business. Running your own business is never boring. It's about that detail. It's about sweating that detail. And that comes from a real interest in everything. Real interest in the product, real interest in the people, and you need the market timing, and you need luck. I'm not even going to mention funding. Success is measured in numbers. It's measured in sales and profit, but also in longevity. And good people make all of that happen. If you work harder than the next man, you will be successful. There are a lot of businesses around at the moment that don't seem to worry about sales and profit, but will they be great icons like Disney and Walmart and GE? I don't think so. Just to finish, one word on inspiration. There was a PR man in Eisenhower's cabinet called Robert Gray. So he echoes my feelings. And he said, "What son did not hear from his mother, 'We expect great things from you,' and know that she meant it. She didn't expect to expect her to be surprised if you came back with news. You were supposed to return the shopping trolley. You're supposed to return goods that you find. You expected not to litter." Now, he was given the highest honour that the Italian government ever gives to anybody, and he was invited to a ceremony to receive this honour, and he took his mother as the guest. And the president of Italy pinned a nice little medal with a ribbon onto his lapel. Everybody clapped and everybody said, "Fantastic." At the end of it, everyone came up to speak to him, and his mother came up and she said, "It's a shame it's a blue ribbon." Most people, the greatest challenge is meeting parental expectations. My daughter always complains that my expectations are too high, and I was worrying about that. And a friend of mine said to me, "That means you're doing the right thing." So I'd say to you, aspire to your mother's expectations. They'll always be higher than your own. So if Disney's words ring true with you, and you can't wait to control your own destiny, then quit talking and start doing. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is now. Thank you for listening.